The screen behind me was filled with deployment timelines and server migration protocols, but all I could hear was the relentless buzzing of my phone. I was mid-sentence walking the executive team through a security rollout when the vibrations intensified 3, 4, 5 in a row. I paused. I never stop a presentation, especially not one this important, but something in my gut twisted. I excused myself with a quick, "Give me one moment," and stepped out. In the hallway, I unlocked my phone and stared. The first message was from my mother. "You're not invited. Serene doesn't want you there." I blinked, thinking I'd misread. The next message rolled in as if on cue. "There's been a change of plans. Serene feels you've been making the wedding about yourself. Caleb's parents offered to help, but they asked for a drama-free day." My hands trembled. I scrolled further. "Please don't overreact. She just wants this day to be perfect. We hope you can understand. Understand." After covering the venue deposit, after paying for the catering photographer rentals over $98,000 in expenses, each one transferred from my account with the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, it would bring us closer. And now I was being erased, sanitized from the day I'd made possible. I felt the pressure build behind my eyes but forced myself to stay upright. My pulse thundered. I texted my mom back one word. Why? Her typing bubble blinked for a long time before disappearing entirely. Back inside the conference room, the air felt heavier. I picked up the clicker and finished the presentation autopilot in full control. No one noticed the shift. Or maybe they did, but no one asked. That night, I sat on my couch, the messages still open. My jaw clenched. I wasn't just excluded. I was discarded. And for the first time in my life, something inside me didn't wilt. It burned. In our house on Rosewood Street, roles weren't assigned, they just happened. Seren got the sparkle. I got the clipboard. When the pipes burst during a winter freeze, it was me who Googled emergency plumbers while Mom paced. When Dad forgot the electric bill again, it was me who called the utility company and arranged a payment plan. I was 12. Seren's still figuring herself out, Mom would say whenever I pointed out the imbalance. You've always just known what to do. I began to wear competence like armor even when it pinched. Seren floated through school on a cloud of last-minute extensions and charm. I stayed up rewriting essays, color-coding notebooks, building systems where none existed. She twirled through cheer practice. I volunteered for science fairs and filed FAFSA forms by myself. By the time I graduated valedictorian, no one was surprised, just relieved I hadn't let them down. I left for college in Seattle with 2 duffel bags and a silent promise I'd never rely on anyone the way everyone had relied on me. 4 years later, I walked across the stage summa cum laude with a job offer already in hand. I worked late, saved aggressively, and lived in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls while others popped champagne with their first paychecks. When our startup sold, I woke up a millionaire. No announcement, no luxury car, just a quiet account balance and the first breath of space I'd ever known. That's when the calls started. Dad's car needed replacing. Mom's hours got cut. Seren's lease ended badly. I helped every time, not because I was asked, but because I'd been trained to anticipate the ask before it came. So when Seren got engaged, helping with the wedding felt like another unspoken expectation. It started with a phone call at midnight. Seren's voice was breathless buzzing. Talia, he proposed. On a boat, at sunset. It was perfect. I was groggy but happy for her. She sounded like she'd stepped out of one of those Pinterest boards she used to scroll through in high school. She said she wanted a small wedding, intimate, charming. Then she mentioned the Griffin Estate, a venue I knew started at $50,000 just for the basics. Don't worry, she rushed to add. Caleb's parents are considering helping, and I know Mom and Dad can't do much, but we'll figure it out. Maybe just help with some of the small stuff. I said yes without asking for details. I always said yes. 2 weeks later, she slid a spreadsheet across the table during brunch. It was color-coded and terrifying. The total budget, $120,000. Small stuff apparently included the entire venue deposit photographer catering and a dozen other essentials. We're just waiting to hear back from Caleb's parents, she said, eyes soft with practiced helplessness. They're not fully on board yet. By the time I realized we'll figure it out meant you'll figure it out, I'd already transferred the deposit for the Griffin estate and paid the first invoice for catering. The calls kept coming. The florist needed a rush deposit. The designer dress she fell in love with was being discontinued. The band Caleb loved suddenly had an opening if we moved fast. Each time it sounded like an emergency. Each time it sounded like only I could save the day. I made spreadsheets, tracked receipts, and convinced myself that once the wedding was over, I'd be able to breathe again, that they'd remember I made it all happen. But somewhere between the third invoice and the fifth urgent Venmo request, I stopped being a sister and started being a silent business partner, one who was never in the photos but always footing the bill. And when I finally asked what Caleb's family was contributing, Seren hesitated. They're unsure. They said maybe later. It's just a stressful time. Apparently, it wasn't stressful enough for them to miss the spa retreat they'd booked for her bachelorette weekend. It started small, a group chat I wasn't added to, a florist meeting scheduled during my quarterly review, a cake tasting I learned about from a tagged photo on Serene's Instagram story. Each time I asked, she had a reason. I didn't think you'd be free. I figured Mom could go instead. I meant to tell you it was super last minute. I wanted to believe her. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. But as the weeks went on, the pattern hardened. I was footing the bill for decisions I wasn't invited to make. I kept showing up anyway, adjusted my meetings, took early trains, tried to insert myself back into a process that had quietly moved on without me. One afternoon, I swung by a boutique hotel near Serene's apartment to drop off printed contracts she'd asked for. I stopped by the cafe for a coffee and spotted her 2 tables away, deep in conversation with her maid of honor, Kendra. I froze when I heard my name. She's being such a control freak, Serene said, not even lowering her voice. Just because she's paying doesn't mean it's her wedding. Kendra sipped her latte. Yeah, but at least you're not going into debt, right? Serene gave a little laugh. I mean, small price to pay for her spreadsheets and passive-aggressive comments. I just wish she'd send the money and stay out of it. I backed away before they saw me, hands shaking. That night, I stared at the color-coded budget I'd spent hours organizing, suddenly unsure who I'd built it for. All this time, I thought I was helping, supporting, being the sister who shows up. But it turned out showing up was the problem, and the next week it got worse. The message came during our Monday stand-up, buried between Slack notifications and code deployment alerts. A cousin on Caleb's side, someone I'd barely spoken to, texted me. Hey, sorry to hear you're not coming. Hope you're feeling better? I stared at it, confused. Then a second one. Serene said you've been having episodes. I didn't know things were that bad. My hands went cold. Episodes. I called my mom on my break. She answered on the third ring, already bracing. Talia, I was going to call you tonight. What did she tell them I asked? There was a pause. She just said you've been overwhelmed lately. That maybe the stress is affecting your behavior. Overwhelmed? Is that what we're calling it now? I said, my voice flat. So instead of admitting I've paid for 90% of her wedding while being ignored and insulted, she told Caleb's family, I'm mentally unstable. She didn't mean it like that. She's under so much pressure. Talia, Mom said softly, like that made it better. Caleb's parents are finally warming up to the wedding. She's just afraid something will ruin it. Something like me. Silence. I'm not the problem, I said more to myself than to her. The problem is she's been lying to everyone, including you, and you'd rather protect the fantasy than admit it. Sweetheart, it's complicated. No, it's actually not. I hung up before she could say more. I stood there in my office staring at my reflection in the dark monitor screen, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. They were never going to see me, not unless I stopped making it so easy to disappear. And the next morning, I did something none of them saw coming. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of cold tea and the glow of my laptop screen, surrounded by printed contracts, email threads, and spreadsheets I knew by heart. I had receipts for everything: venue deposit, catering, florals, the photographer, the rentals. 55 planning files color-coded and obsessively updated over the last 6 months. All of it sat in folders labeled Serene and Caleb Wedding. I opened a new document and typed 3-column headers: pending payments, Cancelable services non-refundable. I went line by line, mapping every dollar. No anger, no crying, just clarity, surgical precision. I started with the venue. The Griffin Estates contract had a partial refund clause if canceled more than 72 hours in advance. I called the coordinator, Susan, someone I'd spent months emailing back and forth. "Hi, Susan. This is Talia Rowan. I need to cancel the reservation." There was a pause. "Oh, may I ask why I'm no longer attending the wedding I paid for? And I can't keep supporting it." To her credit, she didn't push. She walked me through the cancellation, processed the refund, and even offered to send a statement for tax purposes. Next came the florist, the DJ, the rental company, the bartending staff. One by one, I reversed everything I'd set in motion. Most of the vendors were understanding. A few already knew. Apparently, word had spread fast. "You're not the first," the photographer told me quietly, "but you might be the bravest." By early evening, I had completed every cancellation I could. I transferred the partial refunds into my savings account and logged off. Then I went to the shared planning folder, the one everyone had access to, but no one had contributed to. I downloaded it all, backed it up, and deleted it from the cloud. Gone. Every seating chart, every quote, every spreadsheet. I closed the laptop and exhaled. I hadn't realized how much space it all took up physically, mentally, emotionally. For the first time in months, I felt weightless. And then my phone rang. I didn't need to look to know it was Seren. The second I answered, she was already mid-scream. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Seren's voice cracked through the phone. "The venue just called. The florist's canceled. Everything is falling apart, and it's your fault I didn't flinch. You made it clear I wasn't welcome. You're ruining my life because of your jealousy." "No," I said quietly. "I'm reclaiming mine. You wanted a perfect wedding without me, now you have neither." She sobbed, then hung up. 5 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then came my father and a string of texts I didn't bother to read. I blocked them all. Not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I opened a browser window and searched for cabins on the Washington coast. Found one tucked into the trees near a stretch of beach I remembered from a road trip years ago. No Wi-Fi, no service. Just silence. I booked it for a week, packed a duffel, and left it the next morning before the city even stirred. No announcement. No explanation. By the time they realized I was gone, I was already on the ferry, wind in my face. Phone turned off, watching the shoreline fade behind me. There was no revenge in my heart. Only quiet. Only space. And as the boat drifted toward the peninsula, I felt something uncoil in my chest, a loosening that had taken years to begin. The cabin was smaller than I expected. One room, a wood stove, and a battered kitchen table that became my sanctuary. I left my laptop at home. My phone stayed off. The silence wasn't empty. It was a kind of presence I hadn't felt in years. Each morning, I hiked through damp trails that smelled of pine and moss. By the second day, I brought a journal with me. Not the kind I'd kept for work or planning, but blank, unlined pages where I wrote everything I had never said out loud. I wrote about the birthday Serene skipped, the nights I stayed up fixing Dad's taxes, the Christmas I paid for everyone's gifts and no one noticed, the feeling of being useful but never cherished, of being counted on but never counted in. By the 5th day, I found a waterfall tucked at the end of a narrow path. I sat nearby and tore each journal page into strips, letting them fall into the current one by one. It felt childish and sacred. When I left the peninsula, the pain came with me. But it was different. Sharper in shape, but mine now on my terms. I booked a therapist before I unpacked. Dr. Kessler didn't ask for backstory right away. She asked who I was when I wasn't fixing things for other people. It was the first question that made me cry. We started slow. Patterns, boundaries, family myths. I showed up every week. I stopped justifying what I felt, stopped explaining who I was. The grief didn't go away, but it stopped controlling the room. And when the holidays came, I didn't go back to Eugene. I made other plans, my own. Spring came quietly. No big revelations, just small choices that added up. I changed my email signature. I unsubscribed from the group text. I stopped answering questions that began with, "Can you just..." I rerouted the energy I used to spend managing other people's crises, a coding scholarship for girls in rural schools, a monthly donation to a reforestation project in the Olympic Peninsula, the same woods that helped me breathe again. It felt good to give without being expected to. My therapist called it emotional repurposing. She said I'd spent so long being the family's emergency contact that I'd forgotten how to belong to myself. I spent Thanksgiving with coworkers who cooked from YouTube tutorials and laughed at their own burnt pies. On Christmas morning, I drank coffee in a house filled with friends who passed around board games instead of expectations. In session, we mapped out my family roles. Emotional outsourcing, Dr. Kessler explained. They made you the container. They poured their stress into you and called it closeness. I nodded, already knowing it was true. I just hadn't had words for it. We talked about guilt, too. How my parents had raised me to feel responsible for everyone's comfort. How Serene's fragility had become the axis around which our family rotated. But now I was choosing a new orbit, one that didn't require me to shrink. I stopped keeping tabs. I stopped reading between the lines of half-hearted texts. I let the silence stretch. And then, one afternoon in January, a pale blue envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen since we were kids. The envelope was soft at the edges, like it had been carried around for days before being mailed. Inside was a simple card. No flowers, no embossed script. Just Serene's handwriting, smaller than I remembered. I owe you an apology. Can we talk? No excuses. No explanations. Just those words. I read it twice before setting it on the windowsill. It stayed there for 3 days until I finally texted her Tuesday. 3 p.m. Grace and Finch Cafe. She replied with a single, "I'll be there." I arrived early, ordered mint tea, and chose a table near the back. When Serene walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone were the heels and curated waves. She wore a gray sweater and no makeup, her hair pulled into a messy knot that didn't look deliberate. "I'm not sure where to start," she said after we sat. Her voice wasn't shaky. It was quiet. I didn't answer. I waited. "I've been in therapy," she said. "Since October. Caleb and I are divorcing. He didn't do anything wrong exactly. I built my whole identity around someone else's approval. His, yours, Mom's. I kept listening. I told lies," she said. "Big ones. About you. About your mental health. I was afraid his family wouldn't accept me, so I gave them a version of reality where I wasn't the problem. And I let you carry the cost for it. Financially, emotionally, everything. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. Just something like ache softened by time. I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued. "I just want you to know I see it now. All of it." We sat for a long time after that. We didn't hug. We didn't talk about the future. But when she asked if I wanted to see the program she was applying to, an early education certificate, I nodded. We weren't sisters again, not yet. But we weren't strangers either, and that somehow was enough to begin. It's quiet now, but not empty. The dining table I built from reclaimed wood has 6 mismatched chairs, each one filled tonight. Friends pass dishes, tell stories, refill each other's glasses. No one asks what I brought to deserve my seat. They just make space. Across the room, Brian catches my eye and smiles. It's not the kind that asks for anything, just recognition. We met months ago at a tech meetup I almost didn't attend. He'd asked what I did outside of work, and I didn't know how to answer. Now I do. I host, I mentor, I write, I live. After everyone leaves, I wash the dishes in warm water and soft light. On the shelf above the sink sits a small folded card. Cream paper. Ink slightly smudged. I found it tucked inside a thank you note from a scholarship recipient last month. "You were never the backup plan. You were the blueprint." I run my finger across the words, let them settle. For years, I gave my place at the table away and called it love. Now, I build my own. And every seat here was made with care, not apology.